Hey, party people. This is the long-awaited part 16 of Watch Me Design a Fashion Collection. Last time, in part 15, I drew flats by hand. I took my quick sketches and I laid out the flat by hand, really targeting, finessing exact proportions and measurements on a realistically proportioned body and thinking about the construction and the closures. And now I'm going to do similar things in Adobe Illustrator. First of all, I always use a template. I believe I went over this in part 15, how you always want to use the same figure for all your flats for a particular customer so that all your flats look in proportion to each other for the entire project, the entire collection, etc., etc. And your flats template should be the medium size of your size range, whatever that may be for whatever customer you are dressing. And I sell this one. I sell flats templates, and I sell this one you see on screen in my Etsy store if you want it. And what I have done, when I use it as a template in this manner, I change the black lines to like a 20 or 30% gray, so they're less prominent, and I can draw with black lines on top. Normally, I don't scan in the hand-drawn sketch if I have one onto the screen. I usually have it on hand so that I'm constantly looking at the proportions and the design details that I originally came up with. But I scanned it onto the screen so that you, the viewer, can see what I'm looking at while I'm drawing. And as I'm drawing this, I go back, I redraw things, I draw things, I hate things, I delete things, I try again, I try this new thing, it doesn't work. And you may be wondering, is Zoe making all these mistakes on purpose to create a learning experience for us? Or is she in fact a moron? It's a little bit of the first one, and it's a little bit of Zoe is rusty. You know how I'm always talking about practice not magic, always be practicing, and I practice a lot of things, but I also do a lot of things, and I haven't done Illustrator flats in so long, y'all. Because, I used to do flats for people on a freelance basis, but ever since I transitioned more into teaching, my work has moved more into teaching related stuff, and so I don't have a need to do Illustrator flats very often. But yeah, I can still do it. And it's not something I hate doing, but I have to be in the right mood for it. You know what I mean? Like you have everything. I think everyone has those things. You have to be in a specific mood to do certain things. Anyway, flats in Illustrator is one of those things for me. But I cannot stress enough the importance of learning how to do flats in Adobe Illustrator for fashion designers. Illustrators, you don't need to learn this. And anytime, okay, if you want to ask yourself, do I need to learn how to do flats in Adobe Illustrator? Ask yourself this. Are you in a position where you need to ask other people to help you construct your garments? Whether that's a pattern maker, a sample sewer, a factory across town, a factory overseas, a grader, anybody that's helping you with the actual construction of the garment, and you need to give them instructions on how you want the final product to be done. If you need help in that regard, you need flats, because that is how you're going to communicate your needs to people, especially if you don't share a language, okay? Good flats, picture's worth 1,000 words. Good flats are worth 10,000 words, okay? So yeah, learn Illustrator, okay? All industry, fashion design gigs, job postings will demand that you know Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, Microsoft Word, and Excel kind of minimum. Those are the four that pretty much every job listing asks for. Okay, back to whatever I'm doing on screen, right? So let me just throw out a bunch of tips about using the pen tool. I love the pen tool, but there are some tricks that make things easier. First of all, if you're drawing difficult curves like this one and you're really good at drawing by hand, it might be good for you to draw it really neatly by hand, scan it, and then trace it. At least the first few times as you're getting used to drawing curves with your pen tool, and then you can start freehanding it. Obviously, I am struggling because I am rusty, and I was kind of like embarrassed and I was gonna edit all this stuff out, but I figure, why not? Just watch someone be rusty and just keep at it until, things get done, okay? Second of all, you want to, if you need to change the direction, okay, something like curves, you want to follow the kind of natural curve. So you would keep going, but if you want to change direction, like at a corner, then you want to re-click the endpoint to move direction. Another thing, if you want to finish a line segment and just leave it a line segment and then create a separate line segment, all you have to do is click the pen tool again or hit P on your keyboard, and your pen tool will start a new line segment as opposed to just connecting it with the last point that you did. If you want a symmetrical garment, what you want to do is select the part you want symmetrical, the top part of this wrap, hit O, which is your reflect tool, and then press copy, okay? And so now I have two sides. And if you look at my original sketch, it is asymmetrical, but the top half of the garment and the sleeves are identical, so I'm not gonna redraw that. I'm gonna copy that, and then later on, I'm going to change the hem. By the way, please note the little note I made to myself, no armhole above my sketch, because you might be looking at the sketch thinking, oh, where's the armhole? I changed it afterwards. Sometimes it's hard to really see how the whole thing is gonna look when you're only looking at a half of a garment, especially when something is asymmetrical or not a traditional shape. And sometimes once you do both sides, it doesn't look quite right. So that's what happened here. I thought it was a little too wide, and so I deleted that part, and now I'm making adjustments to this part, and then I'm going to recopy the top part of that drape. I did make things a little bit narrower, just a tiny bit closer to the body, and it may not seem like much, but you have to remember we're drawing these at what is this figure, like 8 inches tall? But when it gets blown up, a quarter of an inch on a drawing is going to translate to a bigger difference, a much bigger difference in real life. If you're looking for more traditional tutorials, straight up how to do this, how to do that, step-by-step things on the pen tool, the Pathfinder tool, things like that, please go visit my On the Computer playlist. I do have some Illustrator tutorials there. In the vast majority of garments, you will see some of the back of the garment from the front, and so you need to address that in your flats, whether you draw them by hand or on the computer. Typically, necklines will be lower in the front than it is in the back, even on a turtleneck. So yeah, all these things, right? Understanding how the back of the garment looks from the front of the garment when it's laid flat like this also helps you think about hanger appeal. Hanger appeal is a really important word in the fashion industry, it's 2 words, hanger appeal. Hanger appeal means how good does it look hanging on a hanger? If you walk into any kind of clothing store, you know the vast majority of clothing is typically on a hanger and not on a mannequin or dress form. And so in order to capture the attention of the customer, it needs to look good on the hanger. Typically, if you have garments that are very intricately draped and it looks kind of funny flat, they'll put those on the dress form. Of course, the most show-stopping, editorial, attention-grabbing things will be on the dress form. But yeah, most things are going to be on a hanger. And so, yeah, it is important that your clothing look good on the hanger because that's how people are going to see it when they're shopping. So when you design the back, you're also going to think about, I mean, honestly, except for the sleeves, of course, will hang down, hello, gravity. This flat is pretty close to how it's going to look on the hanger, just hanging straight down, and it doesn't have the curves of the body to appeal to you. You know, some of the drape is going to be lost, things like that. And then you're going to see the back of the garment, and whether people realize that they're thinking about it or not, it all plays into hanger appeal. So making sure the back works with the front, both in terms of how it's going to look on the body and also hanger appeal, is really important. For fashion designers, we do all these sketches. We sketch by hand. We sketch in Illustrator. We draw these flats. We forget clothing is not flat. Clothing is worn on the round. Our bodies are round. Our bodies get viewed at every single angle. And we want the clothing, we want us to look good in the clothing from every angle. And so you have to consider what the sides are going to look like, you know, how the seams flow from front to back along the side instead of making a really weird, awkward angle at the side seam. You know, how the back looks from the front, how the back looks, how 3/4 back looks. Like, there should be a flow. We should consider ourselves sculptors more than sketchers. You know what I mean? Sketching for designers is a means to an end. But ultimately, we're sculptors. Okay? We create three-dimensional objects to wear. And that's really how I view us more. And people say this kind of thing all the time. Designers don't need to learn how to sew to become designers. I think people who, at the very least, learned enough to really understand the garment construction process make for more creative designers because they understand the body on the round and thinking about the body on the round and how flat patterns create three-dimensional shapes, how draping on a dress form can create shapes, how to work with the scale of the body, you know, how fabrics work, how fabrics drape as you cut, as you sew, learning all these things so that even later on when you're working in the industry that you are not sewing all these hems yourself, you have this intimate knowledge of these materials and how it plays with the body. And it does make you a more knowledgeable designer, a more creative designer, a more capable designer. Key Command Z to zoom in real tight. Key Command C to cut along the path. And so you can just trim a little bit of that end, just right in there. Get all super close, delete that. And then P for pen tool, add that. Minus sign, delete that middle random end point, and there you go. Always create enclosed shapes in your flats because most of the time, vast majority of the time, I think all the time, I can't think of a time I don't do this, you're going to fill in your flats. And you may not fill in with a specific color. It might just be all white, or you might fill in with a pattern. Okay, most companies, larger companies, they do a complete line sheet showing all the colorways, filling in with patterns, and you need to have all your shapes enclosed, complete closed shapes in Illustrator to do this. So always draw closed shapes. Just get into that habit. So even if you have something that's a princess seam, A lot of people will do the basic bodice shape and then throw in a line for the princess seam. I would not. I would create an enclosed shape for center front and a separate enclosed shape for side front. Because you never know, later on you might use that same bodice and have contrasting panels. It's just so much easier to do your color blocking later on. All those pieces to work with are so much more versatile when you use enclosed shapes. So now I have enclosed shape for my front, top front, the back of my wrap, and then I have one for the front drape, bottom half of the wrap, and then the back drape. And now I'm going to draw these little shapes, and they're going to be, you know, when you see folds in fabric, you see the back of the fabric, especially when you have it, you know, shorter in the front, etc., like this. Whenever I do flats, I prefer coloring the back parts of my flat in a gray so that it's really clear what parts are the back and what part is the front. Just like I would manipulate line quality to express different things when drawing by hand, I use different stroke widths when using the pen tool for my flats. So outer silhouette things, I use a heavier line. And then when it comes to doing, you know, gathers and drapes and things, I like a much lighter stroke so that it's not as prominent. Another one of my favorite tools in Illustrator is the grouping tool, because it allows you to keep track of things in your layers. So all these gathering lines, you know, I'm going to draw all these gathering lines, and then I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to hit Command G. And it's going to kind of lock them together into one layer so that I can move them together. I can change the stroke width or the stroke color of them all in one go. Because typically, you know, when you have all these lines like this, you kind of treat them all the same. And then if you want to ungroup them, all you have to do is hit Shift Command G. Because the thing is, one of the beautiful things about Illustrator, and also one of the frustrating things about Illustrator, is the way their layers work. There's so many more layers in Illustrator than Photoshop. With layers in Illustrator, every single line segment or shape that you draw is a layer, or it's a sub-layer, it's a path within a layer. So you can open up all your layers, find all these paths, and you can choose one and work with it, which is awesome for someone who is really detail-oriented like I am. But at the same time, the grouping tool really helps you get organized. So maybe you group certain things that you're done working with and kind of put them away so that when you're playing with all these other paths and layers, you know, you can find other things more easily because you've grouped and organized other sections. You know what I mean? It really helps you kind of stay organized and on top of things. Oh, here's a question I get a ton. Zoe, when do you draw drapes and when do you draw things flat on a flat? You draw drapes when it's part of your construction, and you draw things flat when a drape on a body is not part of the construction. You see the top part is completely flat, but on the figure it's draped because it's a drapey piece and it'll hang from your body. It's a loose fitting thing. But in the construction, there are no cowls, there are no ruffles, there's nothing that creates that drape other than the way it hangs on the body. The bottom part, it is gathered, okay? And it is gathered into a flat part, and it does flare and hang some, and it does fold naturally, okay? So a flat is called a flat because you're supposed to draw it as if it were laying flat on the floor. And so those gathers, they would still be there if you were laying it flat on the floor because that's part of the construction, okay? And that's how you can differentiate those as you are drafting your flats. As you know, I would not consider a garment complete unless it had a pocket. And I'm a big pocket geek. I like to get the angles and the placement just right so that when you put your hands in your pockets, your arms are in a comfortable position. I like to think about how big the pocket bag is going to be and if there's going to be room for my whole hand up to my wrist at the very least, or my entire cell phone, okay? Things like that. My wallet, okay? How much room is there for a pocket bag? This last little bit is something I like to do when I am creating a presentation board with my flats. I like to have some kind of backdrop, a drop shadow, thicker outline, something like that. So when I want to do a thicker outline, what I do is I select the entire flat, I group the whole thing, I make a copy of it, and then I take the stroke width and make it like a 5 or a 10 or however much I want it. And then I drop it in the back so I just have the heavy outline all around the outside of the flat. And it just looks nice on a presentation board. That's all. Please give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today or just simply enjoyed yourself. And do let me know in the comments if you would like me to continue with this series. We're going to be moving on to tech packs. If you want, we can move on to like final presentation boards for a portfolio. Like I could turn this design project into a portfolio project since portfolios are such a big thing for a lot of you. Do let me know in the comments. And share, subscribe, drop me all your questions. Check out zoehong.com for links to all my shenanigans. And I will see you in the next video.